Good morning. My name's Jonathan Norman from the Major Projects Knowledge Hub, and I'm interviewing Mark Goyder, who is founder of Tomorrow's Company and was chief executive until 2017. And he's been particularly involved in their work championing business as a force for good, and more particularly recently, looking at the role of procurement. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Good. I wanted to talk to you a bit about this idea of the trust test. So I wondered if you just give us a sense of what that is and where it's come from.
Well, if I start with where it's come from, about 5 years ago, Tomorrow's Company invited a number of businesses, all of them different in their corporate form, in their ownership, in their governance, in their legal status, to come together to compare notes. And it was a fascinating project. We called it Tomorrow's Business Forms, and we had chairman and chief executives from organizations as diverse as the Crown Estate, Camelot, Adnams, the Brewers, Grosvenor, the property company, and John Lewis Partnership, all sitting in the same room. They all presented to each other what their business form was, how it fitted with their purpose. And what began to come out of it were two things. The first of them, which is not so relevant to the trust test, was simply the idea that the corporate form is something that may need to change with time. And a good board would from time to time be saying, have we actually got the right ownership, the right business model, the right structure to serve our purpose? But the second part of this was we started to say, there's something about corporate form that's really interesting when you think about the public dissatisfaction and mistrust around the sort of private companies that are using the taxpayers' money, and very often in the views of the public, misusing the taxpayers' money. And we started to think that it would be interesting if the public could be given the reassurance before government or public sector engaged with a private sector organization, that they had some assurance about, well, what kind of organization is it? What purpose does it have? Does its structure and its business model and its financing serve that purpose? And is it therefore a reliable partner for the taxpayer, the government, and the citizens who are ultimately funding the relationship? And there was born the idea of the trust test. And we then started talking to a few organizations about their experience of being a contractor to the public sector or a partner to the public sector. And several things came through which won't surprise you. One was the fact that it was very difficult for smaller organizations to get involved in the process because it was so complex. Second was the experience that it seemed to be all about price and not about quality or value. And the third was that there didn't seem to be any particular focus on, well, is this organization we're dealing with, has it got the kind of culture we can be comfortable with? I mean, one particular story, a charity that was in fact dealing with the public sector, losing a contract, and then on day one, the successor organization ringing it up and saying, well, can you give us some advice? We've hit a problem, we don't know how to deal with it. Because that charity had been judged purely on price in dealing with a particularly vulnerable group of people, and had lost the contract without any reference to its particular accumulated expertise. So that then led us to develop the trust test idea, and the British Standards Institution, which has been a long-standing partner of Tomorrow's Company, then ran a couple of workshops which explored the idea with various people from the procurement community, from government, from business, and that in turn led to the current process where the British Standards Institution have actually set up a formal process of developing a standard around the trust test.
Excellent. So does it look like a kind of balanced scorecard? What does the test actually look like?
Early days as to what it looks like, but there is a focus on first of all the the capacity of the organization to deliver what it is that the contract requires. There is a balanced focus on the financial aspects of that capacity, and what I like to call the character aspects of that capacity, what many people talk about as the culture, the values of the organization. And I mean, one particular way of developing this idea, which may work, is to think of it in terms of sort of 4 quadrants, where you've got the sort of the integrity, the culture, the values, and so on. You've got the sustainability. You've got the competence and the quality, and you've got the transparency and the communication. So you've got that's, I think, quite a good way of beginning to deal with the constituent elements of a trustworthy partner.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, that certainly plays to one of my prejudices, which is that these huge public projects should be fundamentally a force for good, a force for positive social change, rather than simply a piece of infrastructure. And I think clearly what you're describing there would lead to that kind of approach. There have been attempts in the past. I mean, I'm thinking of things like the Social Value Act, where government has tried to find other measures of value as a basis for procuring services. In what way will the trust test kind of differ from that?
Well, it builds on the Social Value Act. In fact, we talked a lot about the Social Value Act in both in the original Tomorrow's Company project and in the current the subsequent developments. And actually, interestingly, I was invited to a roundtable with other organisations about 2 years ago with the then minister responsible for corporate responsibility, and Margot James, and she was consulting us all about what the government should be doing about corporate responsibility. And I said to her, what are those words of Gandhi about living the values that we wish to represent in the world? The government could start living the values it wishes to represent in the world of corporate responsibility in its own capacity as a buyer of public services, whatever the massive figure that it is that it buys. It's sort of hundreds of billions of pounds. And I reminded her about the Social Value Act, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's very interesting. I kind of forgotten that we that was passed some years ago," and subsequently wrote to her about it. And I don't claim that this is why it happened, but then, of course, this summer, David Lidington, the Cabinet Office Minister, made this big statement about post-Carillion and how the government needs to be very much more thoughtful and promote responsibility in the way that it procures services and goods. And in fact, I mean, I've been in dialogue with some of the people advising David Lidington before and since, and I see what we're doing with the trust test as being one instrument in the armory of any government that is serious about seeing procurement as a major means of ensuring that business is a force for good. And I hope that we are at the beginning of more of a convergence between the sort of the government speeches about corporate responsibility and the government behaviour, particularly from the Treasury, which has been very involved in the latest Lidington initiative, as well as the Cabinet Office, around public procurement.
Excellent. So, if companies wanted to find out more, to get involved, where should I send them, Mark?
Well, you're very welcome to get them to talk to me, Mark at tomorrowscompany.com. Equally, they may want to get involved with the BSI, and the BSI are indeed interested in I think in adding members at this moment to the panel that they've set up, particularly where they're representative of the sort of groups that either are involved in supplying or obtaining the kind of services that will be covered by the trust test. And I think that the key person there is probably Sarah Walton, that's S-A-R-A Walton, who is contactable at BSI or from me.
Excellent. That's very good. If I can ask you to indulge in a little bit of blue sky thinking just to finish off. Looking forward, I don't know, 5 years hence, 10 years hence perhaps, what would you like to see as a result of this work?
Ultimately, I'd like to see an end to the public prejudice that says, if you allow private sector businesses to be involved in public sector work, you'll just be ripped off. Because, of course, there's a vast diversity of people working together. And at one end of the spectrum, you have highly principled businesses seeking to have long-term shared value relationships. And at the other extreme, you have opportunistic businesses here today and gone tomorrow. And what I'd like to see is the public recognizing that both kinds of businesses exist. And now that we have got an instrument that enables us to differentiate between them, when they experience behavior of the rip-off variety, they know that there is some way that they can challenge the business involved in saying, well, in order to get this contract, you presumably went through the trust test. Can I just see what you claimed for yourself in the course of doing that? Or, it's what I do now. Whenever I have a consumer issue with a business, the first thing I do is I go to its statement of values on its website, and I say, well, are you practicing what you preach? So I'd love to see that this being, first of all, an instrument for that kind of challenge, but also more generally, I think what I hope it would create is more of the kind of long-term shared destiny relationships that characterize the best in public partnerships. And to illustrate that with a story from the past, one of the past chairmen of Tomorrow's Company was Sir John Egan. And Sir John Egan, of course, was chief executive of the BAA, British Airports Authority, at the time of the Heathrow Tunnel collapse. And we had a fascinating event with John, where he and other people described what happened in the immediate aftermath of the tunnel collapse, when he brought people together and said, look, we've got two choices now. We can either spend the next 2 years suing each other, or we can spend the next 2 years working together that in spite of this collapse, we are going to deliver this project on time and on budget. They did the second. And the catalogue of behavior change and cultural improvement and long-term mutual relationships that they created is the kind of story that I would like to think the trust test would enable us to multiply.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much for your time and for your input, Mark. That was fascinating.
Thank you.